Radio TV phono nut here, and we have a Ward's Airline battery-operated Bakelite case tube radio from 1946. This was actually built by Belmont, and for the benefit of our blind viewers, I will describe the cabinet. In the center we have a rectangular airplane-style dial, and then under the dial we have our off-on volume knob to the far left, and then to the far right we have our tuning knob, and on the sides we have our wraparound horizontal grill bars, and the speaker is on the facing the left-hand side of the cabinet. Looks like our dial pointer is out of kilter. That's as far over as it'll go, so that probably just needs to be realigned. Looking in the back, we see we have 4 miniature tubes. That's by 46. They were starting to get away from the octal tubes, but fortunately we have the old style IF transformers, so no silver mica disease to worry about here. And this is our 4-pin battery plug. It requires 1.5 volts for the tube heaters and 90 volts for the B+, and these are our antenna and ground wires here. And on the rear of the chassis we have what they call an economizer switch, and when the battery is new you're supposed to push the switch in the down position, but whenever the battery has some when the battery starts to become spent, you flip the switch up. Here's the model tag, model 64BR-1205A, and 64 is the model number, our date code 40 for 1946. So let's live dangerously here and connect our battery eliminator to this and see what happens. Here's our battery eliminator, Permapower Company. These were also sold under the Silvertone brand name, and they were very popular in the 40s and 50s for enabling battery-powered tube radios to operate on 120 volts AC. And this one has been overhauled, so it's in good operating condition. Okay, let's power it on, see what happens. You know it's playing.
Ready for an adventure of a lifetime.
Very distorted audio, probably due to a leaky grid coupling cap. But 1010's as high as we can go because this tuning system is being stopped, probably by this pointer that's misaligned.
Join Dr. Gort and me, Mike Gallagher, from June 12th. DrCruise.com.
Alright, let's get in it and see if we can fix it.
The website, too. Their products are
gluten-free. Well, it does seem to be improving the more it stays on, so
I think if you're looking for something that makes you feel better naturally, you should definitely get... Order online or call them direct. You must use the promo code.
For a second there, I was going to blame the radio for that, but
call 800-246-8751.
I remember that station
use the discount code
here lately,
or order online.
Programming just seems to be just abruptly dropping out for a few seconds and then coming back, whatever that is. Now, I like the way this is designed. You can turn the chassis bottom side up. You don't have to worry about it flipping over while you're trying to work on it. It sits solid because of the way things are designed. And this is full of those solar seal-tight capacitors. And as far as capacitors from the 1940s, those were probably some of the better ones that were offered during that time. And I'm checking the voltage at one section of this electrolytic capacitor, 38 volts, which is low, but it's gradually rising. And the other capacitor has 81 volts on it, which is pretty close to the 90 volt B plus that we need. Alright, I've got -4 volts on the control grid of the output tube, which isn't too terribly bad. Okay, off camera, this point on the capacitor that read 30-something volts, it jumped up to like 46 volts, and then it dropped down to like 20-something volts. I turned it off, turned it back on, its voltage jumped back up to like 40-something. Now I'm getting very faint, distorted audio, and we're reading about a half a volt there. And this cap is slightly warm, so I suspect it's expired and probably needs to be replaced. Yeah, we come up to 1.4 and then it just started dropping. I'm doing a resistance check between that section of the capacitor and ground. I'm reading 180 something ohms and rising. So yeah, that doesn't look too good, does it? Looks like this capacitor is very leaky. Alright, here's the schematic for the radio, and here's our B plus that goes around in here to the audio output transformer primary, and then we have capacitor number 1, a 10 microfarad at 150 volt from that point to ground, and then we come over here, our B plus line comes over here to this 10K resistor that connects to the positive side of capacitor number 2. And capacitor number 2 appears to be going up here to the screen grid of the audio output tube, and that's the only thing that seems to be coming off of that point here. So yeah, that would make perfect sense. If this capacitor became very leaky and choked down the screen voltage for the output tube, that could very well kill the audio. So let's get this capacitor out of here and put some fresh new ones in its place. Alright, after things cool down, I remeasured the resistance from this capacitor to ground, and now we're up to 380 ohms and rising. Alright, I have that questionable section isolated as in electrically disconnected, and we're still reading 385 ohms to ground. Now that's with basically not enough voltage applied to amount to anything. Once you start applying voltage, the leakier this capacitor is gonna be. The higher the voltage applied, the more leaky it's going to appear. The other section reading the ground is reading about a half a megohm. That's certainly a lot better, but I don't think that first section's in too good a shape either. And besides, my rule on multi-section electrolytic capacitors is when one section fails, you change it all, because it's only a matter of time before the other section is likely going to fail. And I learned that the hard way in my earlier days of TV repair. I can think of at least 2 instances where I tried to take the easy way out and just disconnected the bad section and put another filter capacitor in there where the bad section was, and the TV worked fine for about a week, and then the other section failed, and then it came back to bite me in the butt. So that's why when one section's bad, they all. Okay, in this case, I just cut everything loose from the capacitor terminals, and the reason being is because we have this fragile snug tuning assembly that's kind of in the way, and it'd be just my luck if I got down in here with a soldering iron trying to get this all loose. I'd make a slip of the soldering iron, it'd hit this tuning assembly and damage it in some way. So we're going to be remounting these capacitors somewhere else. So I just went ahead and cut everything loose. 1 wire to this terminal, 3 wires on this other terminal, and a 10K resistor. connected between the two terminals. I'm probably going to put a terminal strip on the rear of the chassis and put our new capacitors there. Alright, we have our terminal strip with the two caps and the resistor prepared for install, but before we do that, we're going to just look on our ohm meter and see how two fresh new capacitors react, or how the ohm meter reacts to a fresh new capacitor. Okay, now watch the meter whenever I touch the positive end of this capacitor. You'll see it rise up and then go off the scale. See there? That's the way a good capacitor is supposed to check. Now here's the first section of the old capacitor. Before, wasn't that reading like in the megohms? Yeah, it still is reading in the megohms. Okay, I was looking at it wrong. See, this just reads like a 10 meg resistor, basically. Alright, terminal strip soldered to the chassis, and of course, in order to do that effectively, you need to make sure the chassis and the terminal lugs are clean and shiny. There can't be any oxidation, or otherwise the solder won't stick. And the wire from our screen grid, we were able to stretch it over here. Our B+ wire from down here coming off the switch, we'll be able to stretch that over here. However, these two wires over here that come off the main B+ feed, they're not long enough to reach over here, so we're going to have to redo that and put a longer piece of wire there where it'll stretch over here. I tried to find a place to mount this terminal strip that would be least invasive, as far as if we needed to get to anything down here to replace them, we could more easily do it. No spot in here is really an ideal place, but this spot right here is the most ideal out of any place I could put it, so there we go. Okay, so probably how I'm going to handle this is we're going to remove this short piece of wire from the tube socket, put a longer piece of wire there and run it over here to our terminal strip, and then connect this wire here from this terminal strip over to the tube socket. Alright, filter cap's installed. Now let's reapply power and see if it works better. Alright, here we go.
Conference down at First Baptist.
Oh yeah.
Their conference starts on Thursday, and
let's see what our voltages are now.
On Friday.
Looking at the
come and listen to Tommy
main B+,
that would be the time to do it.
About 76 volts. That's actually a few volts lower than it was before. Alright, and what do we have on our screen grid?
He's been a senior pastor there for a lot of years.
62 volts. That's a lot higher than it ever was.
Out in the Denton area, they got a good
now we have a slight bit of 120 cycle hum from the speaker with the volume turned down. Now that's from the battery eliminator. That's not a fault of the radio. If we were to run this on DC from a battery pack, of course there wouldn't be any 120 cycle hum.
I got one last thing for a guy.
So we're just going to let it run a while and fix that dial, and then we ought to be in good shape. Now, as far as the B+ being low in that radio, that could be caused by something in the radio choking it down, like a leaky cap. But as of right now, the radio seems to be working relatively well to have a capacitor that's severely leaky. Or it could be the battery eliminator itself. You have to remember that back when those battery eliminators were made, there was none of the fancy solid-state voltage regulation that we have today. Yes, there were vacuum tube-based voltage regulation circuits, but you weren't going to find any of that in a cheap battery eliminator that probably didn't cost any more than $10, because these radios have a very high tolerance threshold and they can operate over a relatively wide range of voltages. In those battery eliminators, basically all you're going to find is a rectifier, some filter capacitors, a filter choke, and some resistors. and those battery eliminators were designed to provide a voltage that was close enough based on the radio that was plugged into it. And different radios might provide different loads. You know, this radio, I'm getting about 76 volts B plus now. I might plug another battery radio into it from another manufacturer, and I might get 100 volts B plus. So, but I was looking at the schematic, and the only capacitors that I see that are more closely connected to B plus that don't have, say, a high value resistor between the capacitor and B plus, we have these two electrolytics, which we've just taken care of those. And then we have this plate bypass cap, which looks like a .002 that's on the other side of the primary winding of the transformer. And then if we look over here, we have this capacitor here that connects directly between B plus and ground. It's a .25 at 200 volts. But that's about all I see that could be possibly choking that B plus down. We have another capacitor coming here off of B plus, but our B plus goes through a 15K resistor before it gets to this cap. So if I was going to guess a cap to be causing the problem, it would either be this one, this .25 from B plus to ground, or this plate bypass cap from the plate of the output tube to ground. Alright, I just pulled this plastic dial lens off, which is held in place by a couple little push-on doohickey things, and readjusted our pointer, and now we
few students whose lives we have touched.
They've always had my back. They've always done anything.
And now our dial is traveling across the entire range.
But if he's slight.
That's 670 just barely coming in. I'll tweak the IF transformers and see if that brings it in any stronger. But we don't have much of an antenna on this, so I'm not expecting a whole lot. And these work better on a long wire outdoor antenna and ground anyway. Alright, turning that antenna trimmer woke it up.
Great stories deserve great storytelling. Audiobook Network provides professional.
Godzilla. I see it to Godzilla.
What?
I didn't even know. Because I am not involved in any of the planning. I just showed up.
Now the dial accuracy is not that great. I think a lot of that has to do because there appears to be a lot of slop in this tuning mechanism, the way it's designed, so it's probably about as good as it's going to get.
Is way bigger.
Alright, I got it a little better. I had to alternately adjust between the oscillator and the RF trimmer on the front end here.
You think Dan Beyer would have had any?
It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was.
Tokyo. Yeah, but I eat plenty, trust me.
From your local weather.
To this guy, I don't do fish or...
That's pretty good for 670. And I'm using my body as an antenna. Alright, I pulled that .25 bypass cap loose. Naturally, it wouldn't come loose. You know how it is. When you want something just to easily come off, it doesn't do it. But when you don't want it to come off, it comes off really easy. but it didn't make one bit of difference in our voltage, so I just reattached it, but not to the same place they had it, and put another antenna wire on here to replace the ratty looking one that was here. So I think I'm just about ready to button this thing up and call it a day. Alright, that's 670, and that's pretty good considering that this set doesn't have an RF stage and we're just using a few feet of wire on it for an antenna. Now, interesting enough, this has all Raytheon branded tubes in it. Now, at some point in time, around the time this radio was made, Raytheon bought out Belmont, and then I think for a while there were I know there were some televisions that were branded Raytheon Belmont, but I think by about 1950-51, somewhere around in there, they just did away with Belmont completely. Alright, here we are back together on 670. Now, when it gets a little bit later, we'll do a band scan and see what kind of distant stations we can receive.
Nice inning. Oh, yeah? That was everything. When you were a little kid, being a millionaire and being like Disney Beyonce or having a robot like myself.
And I don't know what that crap is on 1390. It's not the radio, it's them.
Amazingly, scientists have learned that even some plants have been designed.
When you get dead on center, you don't hear that on some radios. On some radios, you do.
When it moves, or wherever it is, it's developing seeds.
I think it's about gotten to the point where a lot of these AM stations, especially those that have FM translators,
Because the mother plant
they're not even really keeping up their AM. They're just keeping a signal on the air just so they can keep the FM translator. And if the FCC ever told them they could turn the AM off, they probably would.
southeast does
the 2024. I've had two of them that are great. I call mine Johnny Roomba.
Now, as far as powering these types of sets, you can find one of these old school battery eliminators like what we're using, rebuild it, and you'll be good to go. B, which would probably be a better option, build a modern power supply using solid state voltage regulation. Or C, you could build a battery pack using modern batteries. On something like this, I would probably put 10 9-volt batteries in series to get my 90 volts. And you don't have to use the high-priced boutique brand batteries to do this. You'd go broke doing that. The cheapo discount store batteries or the mail order batteries will do just fine for that application. And for the 1.5 volts, you can put a couple of D cells in parallel to give you greater current capacity. But on those, I would recommend using a good quality alkaline because the D cells are most likely going to go dead before the string of 9-volt batteries will, because the heaters or the filaments, if you prefer, draws a lot more current than the B+ line does.
As a Patriots fan, I thought you'd be talking more about Mac Jones. Stevie, what do you think about
Now, the advantage to collecting these types of radios is you can usually get them cheap because most collectors don't want them because they're battery powered and they don't want to go to the effort to come up with a way to power the sets. And another advantage is you don't have power supply issues to deal with, such as burned out power transformers or stuff like that you might run into on an AC set. Now, on the downside, these battery sets generally don't have the fidelity or the power output that an AC operated set would, but they still, a lot of them still sound pretty good, and this one's new enough to have a more advanced type of speaker versus an older model, which might have an old pen drive speaker that is going to sound relatively tinny. Alright, so we're about out of time, so we'll dump this memory card and then we'll come back later and do a band scan on this.
Way to go, Jamie.
Alright, we're still playing nicely.
That's impressive. That's good.
And I posted about this radio on the Antique Radio group on Facebook, and as expected, somebody chimed in, "Oh, you need to replace all of those solar capacitors. Those are no good. Oh." Well, my mentor that taught me a lot of what I know, who fixed radios and TVs from the 40s through the early 70s when he retired, he swore by those solar capacitors. Now, my personal experience with them, yes, I've found some that checked leaky. I've even had one or two of them dead short on me, but I found quite a few of them that showed no leakage at all. And seeing as how this is a battery-operated radio that operates at lower voltages than an AC-operated set, and since there's not as much current involved as what you would find in an AC-operated set, and since this radio appears to be operating normally, then I see no reason to go after the capacitors. We'll just play the radio until something fails, and even if a capacitor in this set were to dead short, I don't see that it would really cause any serious damage, so we're just going to let it go at that. And I'm sure all of the compulsive cap changers have already crapped in their diaper about 10 times over by now. And something else I need to bring up regarding capacitors, and I meant to demonstrate this, but it slipped my mind. If I were to take my ESR meter and test that electrolytic, the section that was very leaky, there's a good chance it would show acceptable ESR, and that's another bit of misinformation that's out there. Some sources on the internet act like an ESR test of an electrolytic capacitor is all you need to go by. Well, that's simply not the case. You've got ESR, which is equivalent series resistance, and then you have leakage, which could be, you could think of that as equivalent parallel resistance, and then you have the actual value of the capacitor itself. Now, generally, if a capacitor tests high for ESR, especially if it's really high, then the value in microfarads is going to test lower too, but a capacitor can be leaky or dead shorted, for that matter, and pass an ESR test with flying colors. That don't. But of course, if a capacitor is leaky or shorted, then it's no good.
That is impressive. I'll put up with that. And they are such.
Now, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was an AC-operated version of this radio, and I believe the AC version had push-button tuning, and I think versions of this radio was made before the war, which is really no surprise because there were a lot of cases where radios were being made before the war, and then when the war halted production, and when radio production picked back up, they just simply used the same cabinet designs for a little while until they could retool for new models.
And if you got a big pile of money, throw it at the principal. We need a TikTok channel. It would be.
This dial is very touchy. All you got to do is touch the tuning knob, and it.
Hey, while you're waiting, keep getting stronger.
There's our mumble rap gospel station. I'm so sorry. I hate to be so disrespectful.
So here's a quick
tip for you. Stop overpaying.
YLS 670. I think they've gone off the air for today.
$1,000 over your head with private student loan debt. Don't beat yourself up. Look, we've all made mistakes. What matters is doing something about it now. So, if you're in distress with private student loans, call Y-Refi.
Okay, we'll be back a little later after dark and see what kind of distant stations we can get. A lot of these farm radios seem to be more sensitive than their AC counterparts because, well, they had to be sensitive because a lot of these sets were used in rural areas that were a pretty far piece away from a radio station, so they had to have the ability to pull in distant stations.
Really good. 6 months later.
One other thing I'll mention about servicing these battery radios, whether it be a battery-only set like this or one of the AC/DC battery-operated portables, these types of sets are generally pretty easy to work on, but there's one thing that might throw you for a loop, and I've encountered this multiple times. You'll get a radio that the audio amplifier seems to work okay, and you'll hear static when you tune across the dial. It's acting like it wants to receive stations, but it won't receive any stations. And the reason for that is the local oscillator isn't running. And one of the things that can cause that is an oscillator mixer tube that is slightly weak, and the filament voltage might be just a little bit below 1.5. I've seen it down to like 1.3, 1.2, and the local oscillator wouldn't run because the tube was just a little weak. Bring it up to 1.5, 1.6, it takes off and works fine. So, keep that in mind. And in the case of AC/DC battery portables in AC operation, they usually take the filament voltage from the rectified B+ voltage. There'll be a big dropping resistor to drop the B+ way down to run the filaments. And if your B+ voltage is a little low, then that will result in your filament voltage being a little low, and that can cause the same symptoms. So if you get one of these sets that the oscillator isn't running and you can't figure out why, then check your heater voltage. Even if it's just a little low, that can be enough to keep the tube from conducting.
Community, Meyer and Rosenbaum, now located at 1901 Front Street, historic now.
Like a superhero. $7 billion.
We're trying to get a little DX coming in here at about 6:30 in the evening.
At night we're clouding up and we drop to 45. From your severe weather station, a 9 first warning, Chief Meteorologist Steve Roberts. News Radio 700 WLW.
It's on about the 79 minutes, a clear sky, our current temperature 55 degrees.
Well, that's at about 700.
County, as for those traveling south looking to do the same.
700 WLW, the nation station.
By late May, first-time winds will close starting in June until September.
I-45 as your alternate, and I-45 eastbound in DeKalb has been in a struggle.
That's probably WSB Atlanta.
The exit to I-20 now.
Pete Williams with you. Greg Davis is out for today, and I'll take you to 7 o'clock. Priority Talk Radio. One thing.
That sounds like WLW out of New Orleans.
I can say that. You know, they're all great, but this is a great chapter of a great book. Anyways.
So go.
Is that the oldie station out of Tuscaloosa, Alabama? I'll have to listen and see if I can catch an ID before they go down to nighttime power. Well, I haven't heard an ID yet, but if I was a betting person, that's probably out of Tuscaloosa. And it keeps fading in and out, and here in a little while they're going to decrease to nighttime power. Yeah, that's it. True Oldies channel. Now, why can't we have something like that here? Oh, I know why, but I better not say because my channel might get flagged. You know, we can have that crap on 910, but we can't have something like this. But I'll hush. I won't say any more.
Just email Scott at TrueOldiesChannel.com.
Well, they just cut to nighttime power, so it was fun while it lasted with it fading in and out. But yeah, the reason we can't have anything like that around here is because of, well, let's just say demographics, and we'll just leave it at that. Personally, I think something like that would probably work, but you can't convince radio people of that. And AM talk station, when I approached somebody with them with that subject as far as playing oldies, and they were like, oh, well, we'd have to pay royalties. And I'm thinking, well, have you ever heard this saying that you have to spend money to make money? If you'd actually switch to a format that somebody might listen to, then that would translate into more advertisers, which would translate into more money. But no, y'all just keep running the same third-rate crap that nobody listens to, and then that'll be the next station that'll probably end up going off the air when they can't pay the bills any longer. Well, there's WSM coming in right on 650. I'll tell you what, let's get this in the house where we can see it a little better. Alright, there it is, right dead on 650, so that end of the dial is accurate.
Sam and Kirk McGee, Jim and Jesse McReynolds, legends in the bluegrass world. Grandpa Jones.
I don't know where all that popping's coming from.
Who cares? I mean, I don't know what's worse, but whatever. I mean, I probably.
Water heaters with or upgrading to tankless models. Worried about the cost? Don't be. Financing is available. From plumbing repairs to water heaters, faucets, and more, Pipes R Us Plumbing has you covered. Visit PipesRUsNOLA.com or call them today at 866-2730 and let them peek in your pipes.
That's WWL.
Is turning 25 and you're invited to the celebration. Check out the
Where you live? How you live? Who I want to work for. I don't have to put up with this crap anymore.
Didn't get to it. Swings it right wing to Durant. Durant against Levert. Durant to 35. Durant pulls up, shoots around the rim and out.
That's probably KMOX.
Passion and understanding how he works in that arena. So, with your close relationship with him, obviously he had 200 wins last year. He doesn't get 200 without that win in Baltimore. You were there for that on the other side. What are the Baltimore Orioles?
Nice. That's throwing back. And throwing down some asphalt. All right, what's next? It's time for another edition of Green Flag, Black Flag. Whoa! Here we go again. This is the most cerebral part of the program.
Well, if that's 1390, it sounds like whatever that crap was is gone. It's been there for weeks. We'll see if it comes back tomorrow.
All share in the responsibility to create beauty that ripples.
And it's still not late yet, so it'll probably get better when it gets a little later, but this is not too terribly bad right now. I think that's 680 out of Memphis. I remember when they were an oldies station in the early 90s. And then they switched to an R&B format trying to compete with WDIA. That lasted for about a minute. And then I think they flipped to sports after that. And that's where they've been for years.
Amount of fentanyl that is coming into this country from where I sit right now, the southern border, is killing tens of thousands of
WSM again.
and check because it goes.
I wanted to comment on the South Carolina LSU game. First,
I can't pronounce right now.
and team conditions. For example, one of the guys' night questions is, how long would you last alone in the wild? Or the girls' night deck. One of the questions is, what's something you figured out way too late in life? There are so...
off of Beyond's bespoke skincare line. She has 150.
Speaking of WSM, I read where Beyonce, you know, she's a country artist now. She's going to record a version of Dolly Parton's Jolene if she hadn't already done so. I'm sure that'll sound as bad as what the Dolly Parton 45 being played back at 33 would sound like.
All right, it is the Odd Couple, Chris and Rob, live from the Tire Rack.
Switch from AM to FM. This is Talk Radio 98.3 and 1510 WLAP.
Yeah, you see, they're trying to push the FM, trying to get people to switch from AM to FM, and we see where this is going. You know, if enough stations can push that type of campaign and get enough people to switch to FM, then they can beg and plead for the FCC to let them just shut the AM off.
A service that's for about
Now, we'll pause for another message. This is the Grand Ole Opry Network.
You're listening to the first show ever broadcast from the Grand Ole Opry House, as it was originally heard on March 16th, 1974. And now, the show continues on
I doubt this radio saw any rock and roll, but I'm sure it saw some Grand Ole Opry.
And the fruit jar.
I'm sure by the time rock and roll took off, this radio had already been moved to the barn or wherever, which is what happened to a lot of these battery sets from the late 40s, early 50s. They didn't get used much, and then when the area got a AC power, then the battery radio got shoved to the side. But anyway, relatively simple one, just needed a filter capacitor and the dial adjusted and a little bit of alignment, and that was it. And it's still full of solar seal tight waxy, so that ought to make the compulsive cap changers happy.